Welcome back to another episode of Sports Medicine on Tap. My name is Brandon Align. I'm sitting in Neck of the Woods Brewing Company with my good friend Dr. Frey. Dr. Frey, good evening. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. We're back. We're here. Small mishap last week. We were trying to coordinate a trip, or not a trip. You got caught on a trip. We were trying to coordinate an episode. We were talking back and forth, and you had a little trouble with the airlines and got stuck in Chicago a little longer than expected.
Wasn't pretty. Yeah. First, both. So we were watching, the finals, right? The Copa
America finals. Yep.
And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But we're watching that game, and then next thing you know, tornado warnings are coming on.
Oh,
and so that was Sunday night, and we're like, this is nuts. This never happens.
Yeah, right.
And then we're supposed to fly out on Monday and be back in plenty of time, and I have office hours Tuesday and everything, and then. At the airport, Midway, on Monday, flight's supposed to be at like 1 o'clock, and then it's like 5 o'clock, and then it's like 6 o'clock, and then it's like 7 o'clock, and then it's no flight.
No flight.
Yeah.
Oh,
it was
no.
rough. Yeah. So then, fortunately, I was able to book an alternative flight with my family. Poor family, just dragging them all over the place, right?
Right.
And we got a 5 a.m. flight out of O'Hare the following day. So my wife's aunt and uncle live in Chicago. We were out there for a family event. So we were able to call them, go back. And we actually it was a nice night. We had a good time. Had a few beers, hung out. Yeah. But then I was up pretty stinking early. And then, we were up at like 2 a.m. to get to the airport, to get to the flight, to make, and then office hours all day. And I just wasn't going to be able to pull it off.
And it made sense. And I think, it's just one of those things that just happens. Obviously, traveling and getting delays is just a pain in the butt nonetheless.
Yeah.
And then with that too, personally, I was getting ready for a trip myself, so I was like in the middle of packing. So I was like, a blessing in disguise. Like, all right, we don't have to worry about the late night doing the Tuesday night thing. We'll just go about it. The only thing that did mess up for me was for my trip. My plan was to come here and take some Frank's delicious beers with me on my trip to the Poconos, and I just never made my way back to over here to Pittman, to pick it up. So I was like, I'll just go get some other stuff and try support some other local breweries from the local liquor store to get some sours.
How'd that go?
Not so good, just it wasn't the same.
You're right.
I got 3 different variations of different sours that, it sounded good at least on the label. The labels were cool looking.
Yeah.
And only one of them was good. And I forget who made it, but it was a rendition of the Firecracker popsicle, the red, white, and yellow.
Oh,
or
man,
red, white, and blue rather.
Yeah.
And it was pretty good. And that was it was a lemon tarty that had everything else.
Nice.
The other ones I got was like, oh man, this is definitely not it. This is not something that. Now I would venture to talk to Frank later on about this, and I give him the idea of the flavors that they tried to make, and I can almost guarantee he's gonna make something better.
Right. We've said it like multiple times. Right. I don't know if Frank's beer is award winning and acclaimed, but if it isn't, I don't know how that it isn't.
Right.
And like every guest that we have who comes on says the same thing. Like holy cow, this is really good beer.
Yeah.
And so again, like I say, like, no apologies for the kind of the local guy.
Right.
Like it's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
I put it up against
all of
anybody.
And,
it's so good.
And it's not just,
he's a magician.
Right. And it's not just I think he has a very strong sour creation, if you will. He makes a lot of
which
good
I
sour,
love. So
which
biased,
is good. And
right.
yes, our opinions on that is biased. Yeah. But at the same time, I've had sours from other places and other breweries.
It's not the same.
The flavor profile is different. And I think even when I introduced the idea to friends or family, like, I don't really do sours. And I was like, well, you never had a neck of the woods sour. It's a little different. Right. It's just, even, and that's just for sours. There are IPAs, there are other lagers. Everything else is still good.
Across the board, delicious.
Across the board, it's really good. I mean, like I was telling you pre-show, I tried the What Up Holmes Pina Colada IPA, the milkshake IPA prior to the show tonight, just a little taste of it. It was good. Hit everything on the head. A little bit of the IPA side for me, and I was like, I'll just go kind of more sour tonight, but that's just my own personal preference.
Right.
But still, as always, we always mention Frank.
I love his porters. I love the stouts. I love it's
everything.
Good. It's good.
Frank's got it handled. He's got everything under control.
For sure.
Just like our good friends over at Virtual Orthopedics, they got everything orthopedic related under control, because our show is sponsored by Virtual Orthopedics and Spine. They have you covered from runner's knee to dog walker's hip to yard work back and laptop wrist. They got a doc for that. Find the right specialist for you at virtua.org/ortho.
Yeah.
So tonight is going to be an interesting show, because one of the first times we ever pivoted almost our entire show when we sat down and just kind of did our pre-show talk.
Pre-show talk, yeah.
It was just one of those late
Forget the game plan.
Late pivots, but it's also kind of coincides with just the time of the year. Just a little bit slower time for professional sports. Injuries are, they still occur, but it's like we kind of get the repeats of the stuff we've talked about plenty of times before, and it's like we don't want to bore our listeners with the same conversation.
Same injuries.
Same idea.
Always looking for new.
Always want something a little new. So we're gonna touch a little bit of everything, and we're going to talk a little bit of football in all different regards, even a little bit of soccer, and then we're going to kind of focus on a little tail end of both footballs, if you will, the NFL, and because NFL training camp started today, so it's a big day for the fans of the NFL because football is officially back.
We record on Tuesdays.
We record on Tuesday, so most teams reported today. Some big names reported to camp, and then when this comes out on Friday, hopefully all the people we discussed tonight are still healthy and making their comebacks. I'm sure by Friday when this comes out, there's going to be some big names who might have gotten hurt.
Every time.
It's just going to happen.
And I don't know how we missed it. Like we were looking for different things to talk about. We had one thing that was sort of on the burner. It didn't really pan out. May still get to it yet.
Yeah.
The Olympics are right on the horizon. Looking for that. Maybe that winds up being next week.
Yeah.
And somehow we just skipped. We missed the idea of this
whole training
topic.
camp. I think I kind of got caught up in the world of summer and just doing everything. Like you were traveling, we were traveling. And then I saw something online this morning and NFL training camp started. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah. So off the cuff.
We got off the cuff. But before we go too deep into that, like we mentioned, when you were in Chicago, you were watching the Copa America final with Argentina and Colombia. As mentioned previously on the show, I am half Colombian, so I was heavily rooting for the Colombian national team.
Of course you were. Yeah, sent you a little good luck message.
You did. You did text me in the beginning of the game to good luck, and it was interesting. I was talking to my whole family throughout the show and or the game rather, but it was crazy. Just the whole situation of the game. It got postponed, and I was like, okay, it's Miami weather related. No, it's fan control related. I'm like, excuse me, what exactly does that mean? And here, just Colombian Argentinian fans were just raging into the stadium,
blasting through
security, going
through the vents,
through the air vents. There's videos that were online. Fans were going through different air vents, crawl spaces to get in the stadium.
Yeah.
There's pictures of the stadium where escalators, glass was crashed, all
Smashed.
these things were broken.
Right.
It was
that's disappointing at that
not the
level.
best show of fan sportsmanship and for fans of both teams, but I just think it was a little bit of recipe for disaster, which is the finals being in Miami, which is a hotbed for Hispanic culture across the board.
Right.
And I'm sure you have a very large Argentinian population and a very high Colombian population. And then you set a final soccer game into one setting and everyone just goes crazy.
Yeah.
And even during the game, I think, as people got in, people without tickets were in and they were just over capacity throughout the game, but they just couldn't.
What are you going to do about it?
What are you going to do? Like, these people are in, you can't do any much more. So it was wild, but, you can't have the soccer game and one of the biggest names in soccer for the last forever, Lionel Messi, goes down with an injury, and we not talk about it.
Can't talk about that.
Can't have it. And, you never want to see anyone get injured, but when one of the arguably best soccer players in the world gets injured against your team in the finals, you're like, oh, we might have a chance here.
Right.
Not so much for Colombia, but
it was great.
It was a great game.
It was a great game. So we first I was in Chicago for a family event, and a lot of my wife's family is from Canada. So the night before we're at this event, and there's Canada playing Uruguay, which was they almost won.
Wow.
And that was a pretty exciting event and pretty exciting thing to have going on. And then for the actual game, one of my wife's uncle's friends, aunt and uncle's friends, so gracious, invited us. They're from Argentina, invited us to their place to come watch the game, and a great setup, and it's such a beautiful sport.
Yeah,
it's such a great sport. The flopping still drives me crazy.
Oh, it drives me insane.
But like across the board, right? Like sports wise nowadays, we look at pitchers and they're throwing like 104 miles an hour, and you're like, how? And we look at like the NBA, and guys hitting 3-pointers from like half court and like almost routinely. And I'm exaggerating a bit, right? And we look at the NHL and guys that like redirecting shots, slap shots in the middle of the like these are things that like I think like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you'd be like, no way. And then you watch soccer on this level, and it's the same thing. Their ability to control the ball, to shoot the ball, the agility, the power, like like it's like a laser and bent like the act. It is a beautiful game, and it's a very exciting game. It was, and that final was super exciting. It really was.
It was really good, and I mean, you know, Argentina's been in the forefront of world-class soccer for a while. You know, I'm pretty sure they won the most recent World Cup. You know, I think
they did.
Messi's won a gold medal
that
with them.
That was finally his World Cup. Yeah.
And he's won gold medals with them in the Olympics prior years and other things like that. So like they've always been really good.
Yeah, but Colombia
and Colombia was on a hot streak. You know, they went 28 games without a loss. You know, wins and draws.
How are they not in the Olympics?
They beat up USA.
Beat them up badly.
Beat them up. So we were looking pre-show, and the Colombian men's team did not make the Olympics, but the women's team did, and they also had a pretty good Copa America as well.
Right.
But you know, with Messi going down, I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. And I think to go with the beauty of soccer is also like the head-scratching part of it, like you said, the flopping.
Right.
And then my biggest thing is the notorious cold spray, right? They run out there and they just load it up like they're doing graffiti on a back alleyway, and they just load this thing up with this cold spray it doesn't do too much. It might, if anything at all.
Right.
So in regards to Messi, right, like I think he was kind of in the offensive zone, and he kind of got tripped up a little bit and got kicked in the ankle pretty good with the tackle. He kind of was a little gimpy, and then he kind of walked off. He walked off to the side, but then he kind of went back in once the play resumed.
Yeah.
He was moving around pretty good, and later on he was just kind of running kind of in the open field, but I think he kind of bumped bodies with people, and the way his foot landed in relation to his body, just a little off step.
Down he goes.
And then he went down pretty hard.
Yeah.
And then, you know, after the game, he was seen, you know, crying, emotional about the win, and probably, you know, arguably potentially his last go-around because he is, I think, 37, 38 years old now.
Yeah, reaching the end.
And then there's also pictures circulating of how just swollen his ankle was. It was
right,
big old swollen ankle.
Not a flop.
No, that's not flopping. That's actual injury. You know, like that actually happened, and he got taken off the field. So pretty serious. And again, I think it's also different too with this. In the world of soccer is that, you know, yes, Messi just played for the Argentinian national team, but he's also still Inter Miami player as well.
Right.
And Miami is also in the middle of, I think, the middle of their season. I think it's MLS All-Star break is coming up.
Right.
And Messi's not out of it, which is also interesting because of how much the Messi has a play on everything MLS.
Sure.
Ticket prices are now plummeting because Messi's not going to be in the All-Star game.
I was not aware of that.
And so, like, the business side of the MLS is very contingent on Messi's ability to play, and I think me saying that is just I read a couple of, you know, prominent MLS guys were taken off the All-Star break from the Copa America just from, like, you know, essentially load management mileage, if you will, just to kind of keep them healthy. And so it changes, you know, the outlook of the All-Star game for the MLS as a league. And, you know, now they're you know, the guy their pinnacle guy, the poster kid of the MLS is out. It's like, that kind of hurts a little bit of the business side of it. But, you know, ultimately you got to look what's best for him, and I'm sure he'll be back and he's going to finish out with Miami and do well.
It's, you know, I didn't get the official report on what the injury was.
I couldn't find one either.
My gut was that it was a lateral ankle sprain, kind of your standard ankle sprain was my gut, and I think it'll limit him. Is there the potential for it to be a problem or an issue going forward? Yeah, I guess, but my gut is that he'll eventually get back and be the same Messi that he the same, you know, 37, 38-year-old Messi that he was before, right? Like, and I guess, you know, the silver lining being that he's not playing in the Premier League, right?
Right.
It's MLS. It don't get me wrong, as good soccer, good players,
absolutely.
But it's just maybe it's not quite the same level as the Premier League. So Messi doesn't have to be Messi to still be good in the MLS.
Yeah, he has to be a little bit less of himself and still be an impact.
And still be an impact player. Right. And also just like, you know, the cachet, like just the excitement that surrounds him.
Right.
Really, that's a big part of it. Like that's what he brings, and like ticket prices and validity and all this other stuff.
Everything. I mean, he has so much stake in the MLS with, you know, for his own business and his own financial gain as well. It's like, this guy's a poster child. He's got to do everything, and everything that happens with him is kind of coincides with what happens with the MLS, and it's like definitely
and I think he can be a draw for other good players then to follow suit. You know, Beckham did it. Like some very, very good players. I feel like at the very, very end of their career, maybe Messi is at that point. It doesn't look like he's quite at that point.
Right, he still plays so well. And even like before he got hurt in the game, every time he touched the ball, he just commanded so much attention.
Right.
But it's not just because
of the best team in the world.
It's because he just is so good.
Yeah.
And he just does things. It's like, oh my God, he just completely just evaded that one guy. And
Yeah.
The guy has no idea where he went, and Messi
Yeah.
just went right by him.
Yeah.
And he's on to, doing something else. But
I can't believe the control that these guys play.
yeah.
It's astounding. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's just the finesse of it, and I think the growth of youth sports now, and just
Yeah.
everything builds up to better athletes in the
Right.
On the big stages especially. And I think we're in for seeing it this year in the Olympics. I'm sure
Yeah.
we'll see records broken and things happen. It's just like, holy cow, how'd this happen?
A quick little aside: did you see the 14-year-old?
Sullivan,
Yeah,
Cal
yeah.
Sullivan, I think.
Kobe.
Something Sullivan.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Nuts.
Crazy.
14. Yeah, and already signed to Manchester.
When he turns 18,
when turns
right?
18, yeah.
Which
yeah.
is just, hey man, good for you, kid.
I know.
That's
right.
Your life has changed at 14, which is wild to
Yeah,
handle.
and his brother's on the team too.
Wow.
That's the crazy part. His older brother is a part
That's
of it.
awesome.
Yeah, I know.
Can't beat it though. I mean, that's good for them.
Right.
So a little bit of a shift now. Like we mentioned, we're going to go talk to we talked a little bit of football. Now we're going to go a little transition to American football, if you will. Like we mentioned today, today is the start of reporting day for most NFL training camps. So with that comes a lot of questions. Oh my God, football's coming in so hot. But a lot of questions of guys that we've talked about pretty much throughout the year last year who kind of ended their season early or had some surgeries, had some things. Got a lot of question marks going into this year.
Yeah.
And this is
not a big name, big injuries.
Yeah, and this is like the big pivot for the show tonight is like we kind of took all this idea up and we went through some notes pre-show, and we're going to kind of run down a list a little bit and kind of talk about the prominent injuries that we saw kind of ravage through the NFL last year. Two of the big ones are the ACL, which is very commonplace. We talk about it all the time.
Epidemic.
And the Achilles ruptures that kind of hit some big names.
Seems fairly epidemic too.
Yeah, and, it's kind of happening more at an alarming rate, but it's also they're coming back at a faster rate, which is also making it like not less serious, but like just you can bounce back from them a little bit better nowadays.
Right.
And it just goes to show like the advancement in orthopedics and surgery and rehab and everything. Just like the outcome of this is that you're getting your guys back way faster.
Right.
And they're able to perform at a higher level than they were at arbitrarily, say like 9 months than they were before, or whatever the case was.
Right. So the question is, as people start preparing for their NFL drafts, right?
Fantasy football drafts and discussions are coming in hot.
So what do you expect for some of these guys that are coming off of an injury, and where is it going to go for the guys that are coming off? And camp broke today. Like we have zero information on how these guys look and how things are going. But it's fun to speculate where we might think it's going to be going.
We're going to go down a very deep road of speculation here.
Right.
And outside of, for the most part, just finding out that these guys showed up to camp today is kind of all we know.
Right.
We know a little bit of snippets here and there of information we've heard throughout the few months since the season ended. But we're just going to run down a list and see where it takes us.
Right.
And I think the biggest name and one of the bigger names in the NFL, at least last offseason, it was a big story all through this last offseason.
Of course it was.
With Aaron Rodgers
he
going to the
is.
Jets. He always commands the limelight and media attention. And then that only lasted 4 short snaps.
Unbelievable.
And that was
One of the most Jets things ever.
Ain't that right? So Aaron Rodgers, he got hurt week 1 and he popped his Achilles, and now he's he was relatively popular for his unconventional ways of doing things medically and all of those stuff. So
don't need to get into that.
Yeah, we're not going down that road of things, but everyone just looked at him as he might come back in last season.
Trying to pull off something amazing.
We even talked about that, a little bit on the show.
That was a show, yeah.
And I think the Jets playoffs picture kind of commanded or altered that plan of
the window was closing.
The chances of them making playoffs or making a splash in the playoffs just dwindled away, and there's no point in putting him at risk.
In all honesty, I still don't think he would have been successful in that endeavor, and especially with the chances of the Jets making the playoffs starting to dwindle. Like why would you ever risk it?
Right. And I think it's one thing too is I think it goes overlooked a lot is that these athletes, when they come back and they're cleared based off a functional ability to do the basics of what they need.
What they need to do, right?
They're not magically back to where they were the day they got injured, where that pre-injury level.
Sure.
They're about the same. There's still some, mild insufficiencies or something, but at least functionally they look good and they can pass all the tests. That doesn't mean they're the same person. They're going to be a little bit back, and they still have to get through the humps and kind of get the the routine
over the hurdles,
Yeah.
get like full strength back.
Right.
Like they're close to it, but there's a little rust.
Yeah.
And
a little
yeah,
bit of
just
rust,
like
a
you
little bit
said.
of the psychological point to what we've talked about
Absolutely.
a lot recently.
Big factor.
But the benefit of Aaron Rodgers is that he had a lot of time. He literally had the whole season.
Fourth snap of the season.
Only had 4 snaps in the season, and he had the whole rest of the season to get surgery, repair, rehab, and I'm sure all off season he's been rehabbing, doing his things.
Now the other thing here with Aaron Rodgers, like we talked a little bit about, front foot, right?
Right.
It's
his left Achilles, right? So it's not his plant foot. He's not driving off that to make throws as a right-handed quarterback. So a little different for him.
And traditionally, he's been somewhat of a running quarterback. He's a fairly mobile quarterback, so that hurts him a little bit. Will this impact him? But I think the fact that it's not his push-off foot helps a lot.
Yeah, and I think Aaron Rodgers is one of those quarterbacks who can take that mobility part of his game out temporarily or adjust to it, and you won't really notice his stats.
That's probably
will be the same.
true.
You know, he might just make a different read, or maybe he just throws the ball away instead of extending the play a little bit, and he doesn't have to do that.
Yeah.
So I think at least football IQ in that regard, he'll be okay, and he can make up for the lack of mobility from his Achilles injury.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the Jets have put together, one, a really good offensive line, and two, some pretty good receivers, right? So placing a bet how is he going to be a good, valid, borderline top flight quarterback this year?
I think so. I think Aaron Rodgers, there's 32 teams, right? I think he's a top 16 quarterback. I think he's in the top half.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's, historically,
it's a good estimate.
he's top 5, top 3. He's always been. I don't think
maybe he won't be there.
He's there. Top 10, likely.
Yeah.
But I'll give myself a 6-spot window and say top 16.
Sure. Top 2/3.
So I think he'll be pretty close. And again, I think it's just like a long overweighted movie sequel. Everyone's waiting to see what it's going to be like. Aaron Rodgers in New York.
Right.
We got it for 15 seconds. Now we want to see what happens if he gets a whole season. He's healthy with all these different weapons, with the Breece Halls and all these people who are so good.
They could be good this year. Yeah. As much as it starts to kind of make fun of them, they could be good this year.
And we'll touch on some of their weapons in a minute here. Yeah. But to flip the script of a little bit of a similar injury, again, Achilles rupture, and again for a quarterback. However, it's a little different in that the timing and the location's a little slightly different. For Kirk Cousins, now the new quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons, he got injured in Week 8, and he injured the right Achilles, and he's a right-handed quarterback, so that's his back foot.
Yeah.
So I think timing of it, obviously, Aaron Rodgers has about 2 months of rehab and post-surgical time than he does with getting injured in Week 8 versus Week 1.
Yeah.
But also, I think that right foot being impacted is much more of a difficult thing to do because you rely on that when you're dropping back to push off and to spring everything forward and propel the ball.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. I think he's going to be a little bit more on the later end of maybe later in the season we see him or whatever.
Less of a running quarterback, that helps.
Right. That does help.
I got to tell you, I think Atlanta really, really took a big gamble.
Yeah, and gave him a lot of money
Give him a big contract coming back. I'd be surprised. Now, Kirk Cousins is younger than Aaron Rodgers, right? So he has that going for him. But I'd be surprised if it's an excellent season. If we're putting him in a place, I think it's more in that bottom half.
Yeah.
Of those of the.
And I think So Kirk Cousins is 35 years old.
Not young
chicken. Either, right?
Yeah.
And that I think Atlanta was they picked up.
He's older than I thought.
Michael Penix Jr. I think they drafted him this year. So I think
I have I had no idea how good that guy was until the national title game.
Yeah, that too. And that guy, just to touch on him, we'd have no notes and not to go all of it, but he's been through all kinds of different injuries. He's had an extended college career.
Right.
Ended out going out pretty much on top, minus losing the national title game. But got, at least the notoriety and whatnot, and got drafted pretty high. So I think he's at least a good placeholder for the, at least from the Atlanta front office, if they can start him the season, see what they have in the young guy, get a good sample size. Hopefully Kirk Cousins comes back, can maintain their second half of the season.
Right.
And then they know what they have, in the tank.
They know what they're dealing with going into the following year. I don't think it's going to be Kirk for very long. That's just my guess.
No, yeah, and And it's just tough to come back at such a high level. And granted, their position is much more stationary in comparison to everyone else on the football field, right? Whoever. Yes, they still have to make moves and whatnot, but they can prolong their career because, like the Tom Brady's play for a long time, whatever. it'd be curious to see. And it's like, I don't know, maybe two things could happen. It's very similar to Aaron Rodgers. If Michael Penix comes in and he's lighting up the league as a rookie and doing really well, then why waste your quarterback you paid $100-some million to let him get completely ready for the year?
Keep healing, buddy.
Yeah, and then we'll talk next training camp and we'll have a good competition.
See how it goes.
Right. We'll see how that goes. And I mean,
what position is more important? Is the Achilles more important for than running back?
Right. Exactly. And what brings us to our next person, which would be J.K. Dobbins, who is now with the L.A. Chargers, who tore his Achilles. Also,
tough to follow. Eckler's in Washington.
Left and went to Washington. So now the Chargers have J.K. Dobbins. They also got Gus Edwards from the Ravens. So they kind of take a little bit of the Ravens' backfield.
How about that?
They got that. I mean, but the Ravens did really well getting Derrick Henry to replace those two guys, who's a little bit more durable,
right?
Historically,
and just a powerhouse.
Oh man, that
as a Steeler fan, that hurts.
That does hurt, right? Like those games are going to be even more gruesome,
I know,
more grueling, and that there will be at least one 6-3 Ravens, Steelers game this year because that's like a classic. It's a classic, right? So with that being said, like J.K. Dobbins came back, which is interesting is that he came back from an LCL injury on the opposite side, and then week 1 he goes ahead and ruptures his left Achilles. I think he was running around right to the goal line, and he went to dive for it, or I think he attempted to dive and just didn't dive because it gave out on him. He had no power production there.
I gotta say, man, the Ravens are amazing. Even as a Steelers fan, I have to admit this, they're amazing because they're snake bitten. Injury bug wise, especially at the position. It's like the Braves, right, in baseball right now. Like they're just snake bitten at the running back position.
Unbelievable.
Yet year in year out, they are like always in the mix. Always,
They have such a strong running game, and that's the beauty of football, right? Just the X and O's, like next guy up. And I mean, like you said, they've always had good running backs, and it's always like a 1-2 punch. Even I think he's not even on this list is Keaton Mitchell, which was a rookie for them who tore his ACL this year. He's coming back from it. It's like, how do you have all these good athletes and they just continually to get hurt? And it's not like you can't just say, oh, it's a turf, it's a field. It's all over the place. They get hurt home, away. It's like just unlucky.
Yeah,
completely unlucky. And it's
bitten.
like,
plug and play.
Right.
But I would, I think Dobbins has a lot of upside, a lot of potential. I don't love coming back from an Achilles as a running back, plus coming back off the ACL, LCL on the other knee the year before. Yeah, could he have a good year? Yeah, maybe. I don't know if he's the first guy I'm drafting.
Right. Yeah, I think with him, if you look at it from a Charger standpoint, it's like you got somebody who's good. He's proven his worth in the NFL. He's unlucky, gets injured a lot.
Yeah.
Just let him get a year to be healthy for one full year. If you can get him minimum reps, still be small impact in the game, and he just doesn't get hurt. Next year he's going to be that much better.
Right.
He has enough time to get his feet back under him and everything else, and I think you'll have a much better outlook for them. But then it comes into this territory. If he just pushes it too hard, gets cleared, tries to go out there, then something else happens, or whatever the case is. Like you never want to see it, but just how the world works.
Right. What about ACLs?
ACLs, we had a bunch of them last year, right? Like they came in hot. We're gonna
end hot.
They came in hot all across the league. One of the most prominent, in regards to fantasy football, if you will, is T.J. Hockenson from the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah.
Kind of got hit with the injury bug against his former team when he went against the Lions. Has ACL and MCL torn in week 16. So he was a little later in the year, which not that you ever want an ACL tear, but if you want an ACL tear, you want it like week 1 to 3 to get it out of the way. Yeah. And then you start rehabbing, and then
a little more time to get where you need to be.
Spring OTAs and early summer, you're moving around looking pretty good, and you have a good chance of coming back for the start of the season. Whereas T.J. Hockenson is going to be about 7 months removed from surgery, start of the season.
It's a little early.
A little close.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
I wouldn't foresee him being on the field game 1.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible, but just
right.
I think it's less likely.
Yeah, and I think with that, it's just, and he's their top guy, and I think with the Minnesota Vikings, they lost their quarterback in Kirk Cousins when he got injured.
Yeah.
And now they're going to have a new regime at quarterback, so we'll see what that happens. And one of their best players next to Justin Jefferson, just take your time.
Yeah.
Take your time with him, let him get better, and and it's also for the tight end position. It's much more of a dynamic position, right? You're blocking, you're running, you're catching, you're running after the catch. You're like,
very true.
You have to do a little bit of everything. You have to pass block, you got to run block. Like it's not as simple of a task for that knee. It's got a lot of force to be put through it.
And traditionally, this is a 9-month injury,
Right.
And then you add MCL to the mix.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they repaired his MCL. Oftentimes,
Right.
you can allow an MCL to heal.
Yep.
And they do often heal non-operatively and then move on and do the ACL after that. The downside to doing it that way, though, is that then you're delaying the ACL surgery probably longer than you would otherwise like to. But I don't think. I think he only got the ACL repair,
so I
right?
think with he got injured around week 16, which is around the holiday season, and then it's on the article we have, it said it waited several weeks for the MCL to heal,
Right.
and then he underwent the ACL surgery in late January. So again, I think you put him back about 6 weeks or so. And again, like you said, that's just 4 to 6 weeks. You can come back sooner. So if you're talking, I don't know, say he comes back week 10.
Yeah.
If the MCL wasn't involved, you're looking at week 4, week 5, something along those lines.
And I'll tell you that MCL does heal, and people do very well with it. But it is usually a tiny bit looser than it was before you injured it. Yeah. But I as long as they gave him the time, I would foresee, in all likelihood, he still has a good career ahead of him. I don't know if this season is going to be. I don't know if he's going to be your guy. Maybe you kind of stash him, late round grab, stash him on your bench. If you have an injured, an IL or injured reserve, you can put him there and just maybe you get him halfway through the season.
Yeah.
And even then, like, he's just coming back. It's usually there's a little bit of a ramp up period, but maybe have him for a playoff push or something.
Yeah, and
like
I think that too is just in general, right? Like, the first 4 weeks of the NFL, everyone across the leagues is trying to figure it out.
Right.
They're trying to figure out who's the guy, who's the best guy, what plays work, whatever. And same thing for these guys who come back week 10.
Yeah.
They still got to go through that 4-week period of give yourself the acclimatize and figure out what the heck's going on out there.
Yeah.
And so you're talking. So again, I don't know when he's coming back. Hawkinson comes back week 10.
Yeah.
He probably won't be putting up Hawkinson in for stats until week 14.
Right.
So,
which from a fantasy football playoff, your season's over.
Yeah.
Like
Season's over, or you're making the craziest call in the championship and you're putting this guy who hasn't played too well,
Right.
So we'll see what happens with that. And to go back to the New York Jets locker room a little bit, they signed Mike Williams, the receiver from the Chargers, who tore his ACL in week 3 last year. He'll be about 9 months. He had surgery in late October. He's going to be 9 months post-op when training camp opens. So
that's where you want to be.
Right. So we'll see this week. Again, training camp just started today. Jets reported today, and with that being said, Aaron Rodgers was seen at camp reporting. So it's kind of interesting. By the time the show comes out, what reports are going to come out?
How are these guys looking?
How these guys looking, and it's like camp season, right? Like I've already gotten some fantasy football alerts of this guy's in the best shape of his life. He looks amazing. It's the best, right? Who's taking the reps with the first team? Who's taking reps with the second team? All this stuff. It just
sometimes the guy who just signed the big contract, he's not in the best shape of his life. He reported 20 pounds over. But it's the guy who's working for a contract year. He's in the best shape of his life.
Right. Exactly. 100% right. So again, another person who could be a very big weapon for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
Again, if he's healthy, and again, if he can maintain healthy, because he's also been someone who's always kind of injured a little bit here and there, always banged up.
Yeah.
You never want to see that. So again, one of those, we'll see what happens.
What about cross town?
Across the pond or across the hallway, if you will, in MetLife, you go to the New York Giants locker room, and you got Daniel Jones, the quarterback that they paid a lot of money to, who got injured week 9.
Yeah.
But the big thing with him is that we've kind of talked on, Hawkinson, ACL, MCL.
Yeah.
Mike Williams is also in this regard of he and Daniel Jones has an isolated just ACL tear. Pure ACL tear.
Not that that's great.
Not that it's good. You wish nothing happens, but if you do injure a ligament in your knee, you only want it to be at least one, and not multiple, the things like that.
Absolutely true.
Don't want all that extra baggage, if you will. But Daniel Jones, I feel like he just
Saquon.
Saquon. That hurts big time. And, Daniel Jones was coming back from a lot of neck issues. He had some neck stuff going on, had some neck surgeries, came back.
His AC joint is what gave rise to protected.
Yeah, right. I mean, exactly. His injury history gave rise to our friends over at Protected. They were one of their first patients when he was down in college. So it's interesting to see what happens with him. His goal is to be ready for week 1. But with the New York Giants, I feel like they might have to reinvent themselves now that they lost one of their biggest playmakers in Saquon going to the Eagles. So
you're happy, man.
Yeah. Obviously, as an Eagles fan, I'm happy we got a stud back there, and hopefully, as long as he stays healthy as well.
Good point.
Talk about someone who's injured often.
Glass.
So we'll see. It's interesting, and again, I think from a quarterback standpoint, it's a little different. However, Daniel Jones is a mobile quarterback. He does a lot of running. Sometimes he's led the Giants in rushing attempts and yards or whatever the case is in games. So I think that impact will make him slow down a little bit, and then it's like, we're going to force Daniel Jones to be a pocket passer, and we really haven't seen what that looks like.
He's shown splashes of like a lot of talent.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think coming back off of the injury, I don't think that my gut is that the Giants aren't going to be quite as good, and they've had a couple rough years, right? But they've had a couple decent years. My gut is that Daniel Jones isn't at his best this season.
Yeah,
I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes along with the entire Giants organization. I think they kind of a little bit of what they call the rebuilding.
Year, yeah.
Those kind of, we'll just chalk it up as that and see what happens. Another person who made the list from this article was a rookie running back, Jonathan Brooks from the Carolina Panthers.
He's the only rookie we have on our list.
Only rookie
right?
in the list, but I think in the snippet that ESPN put on in this article, which is really interesting about that, is the gamble statistically that it is to take a college kid who has a history of an ACL tear, especially recovering from it going into the NFL.
Right.
Like, yes, their tape in college looks really good. They have all this stuff, but they're coming off an injury. And the general assumption that they'll just come back because it's very commonplace for that to happen now. But numbers-wise, it's kind of a risk. Kind of roll the dice.
Yes, it is. Very much so.
So I'm just going to read a little bit of what the numbers say off of this article. The NFL published a study in 2019 that found players who entered the combine post-ACL surgery had a 25% chance of suffering a second ACL surgery on either side within 22 months, as compared to 9% for those who had no history of prior ACL surgery. So with that being said, it's like you draft a guy who has a 25% chance of injuring his knee.
Yeah.
That's just his knees.
Terrible. Scary,
and
right?
That's without everything else that comes with the sport of football injury-wise.
Yeah. So, and this is like a rough version of a statistic I often give to my patients, and we've talked about it a little bit with Dr. Bernardini on the show,
Mm-hmm.
and it to me this is astounding. It is an astounding statistic, right? So much higher rate of another ACL tear than the let's say average population, someone who hasn't already torn their ACL. We're not talking about just a re-tear, either knee.
Either one.
So what does that tell you? And the only thing that I take away from that, and this was the whole genesis, or in a large part, the genesis of the Energy Lab and like injury prevention and whatnot, is that some people are predisposed to the way they're built, the way they land, the way their muscles react, all this other stuff.
Exactly.
Otherwise, why would the other knee have the same injury rate as the recovering knee? Some people are predisposed, and at least we know that now, and I know NFL programs know that now, and they're doing the injury prevention training and the plyometrics and the jump training and trying to reduce that rate of re-tear. But that's a big deal. That's a really crazy statistic. And like I share it with patients and patients' families fairly frequently, and it's when I see it then in black and white, like I'm glad that's catching on. People are realizing, like, holy crud, like we need to do something about this.
It's a bigger deal, and it's not just okay, I'm good from my ACL surgery, all is good now and keep going. No.
You need to start protecting
radar,
yourself. It's almost like if you have melanoma, or you had melanoma, or your family member had melanoma, you're at a much higher risk of getting melanoma. You have to be that much more careful about protecting.
Exactly.
Think about it like that, right?
Yes.
Like you are at a higher risk, and you have to do everything right to reduce that risk.
Yeah. And I think that just comes in ironing in and like focusing on your functional movements and all your training and stuff, and getting all those little insufficiencies, identified and fixed.
Right.
To not put you in a predisposed position to where you're at risk for another injury of this. And like we mentioned already, J.K. Dobbins, right? He came back from an ACL, LCL, and he didn't hurt his knee, but he got hurt somewhere. He got on the opposite side of the Achilles.
Yeah. Then you're wondering, is it kinetic chain? Like what's going on? Yeah.
So it's always interesting to see the combination of those two things, and like, you don't want to see it happen. But again, a team of the Carolina Panthers, they traded away Christian McCaffrey, and then they're trying to rebuild. I guess that, and they take a little bit of a roll the dice, if you will.
What happens with Ayuk? Not to get off topic.
I don't know. Apparently he showed up.
Really?
Apparently he reported to camp today. Although he's requested a trade and contract negotiations, he showed up.
Yeah.
Whereas, in regards to who's holding out and who's not, as an Eagles fan.
Did CeeDee Lamb show up? What's going on there?
I haven't seen anything about CeeDee Lamb. I do know at least
Jamar Chase. I remember that was becoming a little bit controversial.
Yeah, that's coming controversial, but I think the GM was saying that they're no, it's fine. It's funny because all this stuff is actually like. It's like, oh yeah, I did hear something about that recently because camp is like starting, so I'm getting the alerts and stuff.
Exciting, yeah.
Jamar Chase, I think the GM for the Bengals was saying that he's looking at it just to kind of hold off on it and just, it's time to just play football right now and talk money later.
We don't have the contract done yet. It's not getting done. That was like very, very much a Pittsburgh Steelers approach. Like they have their deadline. If it's not done, like we'll deal with it at the end of the season. We don't want a distraction.
Exactly, and I think in today's world of everything, it is a distraction. It's continually happening, and I mean even along the sides of folks who do hold out, former Eagles Hassan Reddick is now holding out from the Jets minicamp because he wants a restructured deal and he's on the last year of his deal and he wants a little bit more. So,
as a fan, it's very frustrating.
Right.
But if you take a step back and these are often now a lot of the money winds up being guaranteed for the upper echelon players, but it's not. They're not. It's not baseball. These aren't guaranteed contracts.
Right, they're not.
So I understand where sometimes these players are coming from. You know what I mean?
And I think it's how do I say this, is that the sport of football is so dangerous in that
dangerous.
You got to really collect those checks early and get it taken care of because any snap, it's not to be more, it could be the end of it. It could be,
Oh yeah.
Similar thing of very routine play happened with DeMar Hamlin and that went out of, that completely happened.
Crazy. Yeah.
And just stuff like that can happen. So the business side of this sport sucks when, your favorite players hold out and they don't show up to camp.
Yeah. Frustrating.
And then that can also pivot and make them a little out of shape, which could lead them to injury and then all this stuff. So you can go down that rabbit hole a little bit too.
Really good point.
So
the guy I couldn't wait to talk about.
Oh, I know. We're narrowing down. So this whole conversation kind of started with the idea of a recent viral video going out with Nick Chubb, who we've talked about.
Just a beast.
Just a little while ago, episode 80. We're recording episode 108 tonight, so about almost 40 episodes ago, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Or 30, rather. But, he had a wicked injury in this year.
Do you remember, so it sort of blows my mind, thinking back about it. The initial report was MCL.
Yep.
And we were kind of not laughing about it, but there's no way it's just his MCL.
That knee does not bend that way with just a MCL tear or injury. It just doesn't happen that way.
Right. So then what was the actual injury? In hindsight.
So in hindsight, he had an ACL tear, an MCL tear, and a meniscus tear.
Right.
From the September injury back in, I think that was week 1 or I forget whatever week. Early.
It was week three. Week three. It was early. Yeah. Still playing the Steelers.
Yeah. So we did episode 80 September. So super wicked, very gruesome. And the crazy part is that Nick Chubb is not his first time doing something this gross.
Unreal.
It's
gross.
It's such a gross injury. You don't want to see a knee go that way. It's just
horrible.
Yeah. It's tough to see. It's tough to watch. And he's already went through.
You had the great line. You never want to be a flamingo.
Right? It's man, it doesn't look good, but he's already done it once. He can do it again, I guess, right? But the biggest thing is that he's now squatting 8 months post-op. There's a video of him squatting 585 pounds on a soft bar, a soft barbell.
How?
It's holy cow, man. This guy's a freak, right?
It's amazing.
Now, granted,
how?
It's a very one plane motion. He's going up and down with the weight. Obviously,
it's not cutting, pivoting, which is what we're talking.
Right,
the ACL is all about.
Yep.
Right.
So it's promising to see him putting up weight. The strength is there, which is, I certainly wasn't squatting 500 plus pounds after my ACL surgery, so I applaud him for doing
probably
it.
not squatting 500 before either.
Yeah, definitely not. For sure, definitely not. But, these guys are doing such heavy weights to get back to that, 8 months post-op is pretty impressive, especially with the multi-ligament.
We had Jeff Murray on when we did that show, and I remember that I basically he's done, end of his career. There's no way.
Yeah.
And I remember Jeff saying, the same reason he's as good as he is, the same reason that he's out there and he's reached that level, is the same reason that he actually has a shot to get back. That these guys have this determination, this drive, in addition to the natural ability, right? And that he actually has a shot. And I thought no way, but it'll be exciting to see. Maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about a guy who, dislocated his knee back in 2015, tore his PCL, LCL, and MCL, and then went on to post 1,000+ rushing yards in the next 2 seasons in college.
Right.
So like he's done it before, and he has the ability to do it, and clearly he's a freak of nature, and he can,
very few people in this world. Right.
Like I think he might be up there with like the freak of rehab, if you will, like the Adrian Peterson type deal of like how well he did when he came back.
Sure.
How he posted 2,000+ rushing yards. Like those guys are few and far between, but I think Nick Chubb kind of goes along with those lines of people who like are those X factor, the outliers who are going to make a comeback.
Far outliers.
Now, the Browns haven't given a date. They haven't given a date when they expect him to come back. They just said they're hopeful at some point this year we see him again.
Right. Now he too, like you said, ACL, MCL, and meniscus, but ACL, MCL, but they went a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
He had surgery early.
Right.
Typically, you repair the MCL when you do that. You repair the MCL on the first surgery, as opposed to reconstructing it. Depending on where the tear happens on the MCL, especially if it's lower down, close to the shin bone, the tibia, they tend to heal less predictably. So in that scenario, sometimes you go in early and you'll do a repair, as opposed to waiting until later if it doesn't fully tighten up and then try to do reconstruction, which doesn't work as well.
Right.
So you do a repair early, and then friends at Arthrex, you put in internal brace to help support that, and then you can start doing some of your prehab and getting ready for your stage 2 surgery where you do the ACL. Sometimes if you try to do both at the same time, especially early like that, you deal with stiffness, and it could be like, it may not sound like a lot. That could be like derail everything. Like career's over now. Stiffness can be a really bad
big issue.
problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they went that route, as opposed to we were just talking about, was it TJ Hawkinson where they went non-op on the MCL, took their time. So if you think it's going to heal, if it tears closer to the femur side, the thigh bone side, then lots of times you'll just non-op, give it a month, let it tighten up, and then come in and do the ACL.
Right.
If it tears distally, then you're more inclined to potentially operate early, repair that, do some PT, and then come back and do the ACL, which is like, it sounds like they did for him.
Right, and I think for Nick Chubb, he had his MCL and meniscus repaired in September of 23, which is pretty much right after the injury, and then they waited until November 2023 to do the ACL.
Bingo.
Repair.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, like you said, just prepping everything, getting everything, but still, November to July is that's like their 8-month marker, if you will, is what they're, counting it from the November to July is when the video came out.
I'll be blown away if he's there at the start of the season,
but
I guess you never know.
You never know. I mean, I think he's there's 18 weeks in the NFL. He's like in the middle third somewhere,
but maybe the first, I was going to say, 4 to 7, something like that. Maybe that, and maybe that's a pretty reasonable, return.
And
prediction.
I mean, we'll see. Just one of those things of what's going to happen.
And will he be what he was? I got to imagine it's going to be a little bit of a step down.
This year, I think a step down. If he's healthy and carries on and can get a full off-season of training in next year, I think he's back to a little bit of where he was. But then, age comes into factor. He's getting a little older.
Yeah.
Even in like some reports of the articles I read, it's just he's like, I feel like I'm still catching up. I'm not where I should be at this point, which is like I'm at camp where I should be peaking in my training. He's still trying to catch up to get to that point. So
to be expected.
And
the lifespan for a running back in their career it's short. It's not like other positions.
Right. So time will tell, and it's just the beauty of the football, right? We'll see what happens, and what external pressures, if other running backs in their organization get hurt, and they might put a little bit more pressure on him to get back sooner than later. You never know.
Right.
We'll see what happens.
We talked a little bit about Joe Burrow previously.
We did. So we previously talked about Joe Burrow when he got cleared for most football activities, but he wasn't completely cleared. This week, he's finally a full participant and cleared for all football activities, which in the worlds of practicing for football, it's for a quarterback, that doesn't change much. You're still not touched in general.
I would think they start to get an idea, though, right? Like, what do the mechanics look like? What's the actually like? Is there zip?
Yeah.
Is the ball flying or floating?
No pitch counts either.
That's true.
No throwing counts. I'm sure he was a little bit on a pitch count, if you will, going into OTAs and other things like that. Because there was, I know when we talked about it before, he just kind of scuffed off questions about how bad it hurts, if he still had any issues with it. He just kind of like, it's fine, everything's okay.
Yeah.
So hopefully at this point he's okay, but it's a lot for
it's a pretty
your
bad
wrist.
Injury.
For your wrist to be unstable as a throwing athlete, you know. Now if it was in his left wrist, non-throwing wrist, this
cares?
discussion wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, but it's his throwing hand that's going to affect him a lot. And then, God forbid, he falls on it awkwardly and just pisses it off a little bit more, or just kind of aggravates it again. You never know where it goes.
I worry for that guy. I am so curious to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
Is the honest answer.
Yeah.
And you know, for me, it's a little bit. It's an unusual injury, and I will say that, you know, hand in general is a little bit of a weakness of mine. So I'm a little. I'm not super excited about speculating. My God, is that this is going to be an impactful injury? That maybe he's not quite the same.
That, and I think you might see it in like those opportunities where he has an opportunity to throw a little bit deep down the field and might come up short, might be a little inaccurate.
Yeah.
Like little things like that, which might just go overlooked in the normal play of a game, but it's like, you know, last year Joe Burrow, when he's healthy, might have made that play. You know, things like that might be a little different.
And maybe he adjusts. Or like Peyton Manning, when he came back and barely throw the ball like 10 yards.
Yeah.
It was ugly, and his strength came back slowly. But a big part of that was Peyton Manning adjusting and learning how to play without the same
just crazy
strength.
football IQ, right? Similar to what we talked about Aaron Rodgers. I think he can adjust the game enough to still make an impact, whereas Joe Burrow is a younger quarterback, and you would hope that his football IQ has been increasing over the years.
He's one of those guys where I can actually see him having that wherewithal and making that adjustment.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now it's just a matter of the Bengals having all the supporting cast in the right place, because they lost a running back. You know, I don't know exactly what they did, their offensive line, if they did anything, but I know historically, I'm pretty sure Joe Burrow has had a lot of contact in his first few years in the league. He's been on the ground a lot. It's like, if you want to protect your franchise quarterback, you got to beef up that line and make sure you
protect your quarterback.
Right. So, with that being said, to tie in, you know, Peyton Manning and quarterbacks, the Indianapolis Colts and their rookie quarterback that they drafted last year, Anthony Richardson, who got smoked by the injury bug early.
I know.
You know, he got a concussion, and then he had a bruised knee, and then what ultimately put him out was an AC separation, AC joint sprain.
Yeah.
That was bad enough to warrant surgery.
Yeah.
So that goes to show enough, without knowing the ins and outs of his medical chart, is that that's pretty serious. It's not just, you know, typical AC joint sprain that we see pretty often, that a non-surgical kind of deal.
Yeah.
So him going, you know, getting the surgery and being out for the whole season, questionable how he's going to look coming back with the throwing shoulder affected.
So, you know, it is worrisome that it's his throwing shoulder, and like little tidbits for this particular one. You know, we grade them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You know, but generally, for the most part, the traditional grading was 1 through 6.
Right.
And it's different directions. Like, but traditionally 1, 2, and 3 right off the bat, don't get surgery.
Right.
But 3, which is, you know, up to 100% displacement, sometimes doesn't heal the way you want it to on its own, and then eventually gets a surgery.
Right.
4 means that it went posterior, went back, and it's kind of entrapped within the muscle trapezius. 5 means it's greater than 100%. It's like 300%. And then 6 is like really kind of unheard of. It goes down and underneath the coracoid, one of the bones in the scalp, in the shoulder blade. And so his was clearly, if you got surgery like that, 4, 5, or 6, right? Now, they fix well, they heal well. They all stretch out a tiny bit, those repairs. They really do. They all stretch out just a tiny bit. My gut is that it won't stretch out so much that it's a problem, that he will come back and still have a good career. I think this is one of the less worrisome injuries. Typically, people do well with this. So if I have to be a betting man, I think he does just fine, but it is a little bit worrisome that it's his throwing shoulder.
I think his injury outlook, if you will, was kind of like, hey, you're in the NFL now.
Right.
I think he tried to a little bit more physically push himself through and try to run over people.
I think you're right.
And that led to a concussion, a bruised knee, and then your AC joint separated.
That's the bigger word. What's the next injury?
Right. Like, are you going to be able to survive the contact, you know, year 2 going into it? And are you going to adjust your play enough to slide a little bit more, slide a little earlier and often, and not get these bangs and bruises that, you know, kind of deal?
And these aren't like 9-month injuries like your ACLs and your Achilles. Achilles is a little less than 9 months. I mean, it's just 6 months, but these aren't those kinds of injuries.
Right.
These take a little while, but typically you're back to where you're going to be sooner. So he's had some time to work out, get strong, go and throw, and I think the outlook early is better for him.
Yeah. And I think there's also been early videos of him throwing and everything like that in the spring practices. So we're in July now. So a few months ago, he was moving around.
Already, right,
so
good
he
sign.
already has a good shot at coming back. And, you know, I think the Colts are all in on him this year. And they want him to be his guy.
He's the guy.
Their guy. And they drafted him to do so. And so hopefully this year he does. So, again, one of those ones is interesting to see because, again, small sample size last year.
Small sample, yeah.
A decent sample size, but injury sample size. So hopefully that changes and you can get a lot more out of it.
Yeah.
To go down our list a little bit more is Tank Dell, another rookie who blew it up last year, but again got caught in an unfortunate situation and fractured his fibula. Now, of the ones that we mentioned so far, he's kind of like the best outcome.
I'm the least worried about that.
You know, he got injured week 13.
It's like nothing.
You know, that's just by the end of the season, week 18, he was pretty healthy. You know,
right.
4 or 5 weeks after that, bones healing, he's moving around pretty well.
80% of the weight in your extremity goes through your tibia, the big bone in the lower leg. 20% goes through the fibula. So if you have a fibula fracture, if it's down lower by the ankle, usually you use like halfway down as kind of your demarcation. Then that becomes an ankle fracture. That's a little bit different. If it's a little bit higher up than that, which is usually what we would describe as a fibula fracture, it just get the bone to heal. You're fine. You'll never know you had an injury.
You know what else? I was just reviewing this little snippet here. As I forgot about this part, is that he was running around the OTAs in March, full speed, kind of fine. He was a victim of a shooting. I
forgot about that.
I completely
You're
forgot
right.
about it.
That changes things.
It's a little bit, right? It's the last sentence on this line here that I didn't see the first time when we reviewed our notes. That he did get shot in April,
right.
But then he was kind of, he was back on the field with his teammates in May, running routes and moving well.
Hopefully not in the fibula again.
Yeah. So as long as that goes well, and that's a whole different slew of things that could happen with
different
that.
Ball game, right?
Different ball game. Hopefully everything with that is resolved and there's nothing happens with that.
Take everything I just said about him and just cross it off, and now just draw a big question mark.
Yeah, just as you were saying, it's like this tiny little line is in between our last guy here. Is that I was like, oh yeah, it was involved in a shooting incident. So that's.
We should probably mention this came off of ESPN, right?
Yeah. This is an ESPN article that we're using as our main
kind of our reference.
Our reference for tonight.
Springboard for the info.
Yeah. So to go with our last one here is on the list that we got from this ESPN article. It's the quarterback from the Browns, Deshaun Watson, who had a very interesting kind of season last year. He was injured on his throwing shoulder for several weeks, as reported as a rotator cuff contusion that happened in week 3. And then later on, sometime in early November, I believe, it was reported that he sustained a fractured glenoid and a torn labrum. Oof. So a little bit more than just a bruise to your rotator cuff, a little bit more involvement there.
Oof. Yeah. And I hope the bruise of the rotator cuff was really just a bruise of the rotator cuff and not actual tearing of the rotator cuff. Right. And then fractured glenoid and torn labrum. So that's a typical dislocation. Typically that's what happens, right? You dislocated his shoulder, knocks off a little piece of bony fragment. They don't do great.
Right.
If it's really small, it's not a big deal. But if it's a moderate-sized fragment, especially
in
throwing shoulder,
athlete, right?
Football, heavy ball, oh man. Right. Yeah.
And that's just, it's funny too, because how you described it, at least, I'm not speak for you, but right, that's just a general assumption of just the injury itself and just a throwing athlete.
Right.
Then you throw on just one unfortunate play where he's in the bottom of a pile and a big 300-pound defensive lineman falls on him in an awkward way, and that's a whole different ball.
Flat.
Just the unfortunate beast, if you will, of football. Things can go real south real quick, we mentioned already.
That's exactly right.
But there's still a lot of stuff to be talked about with him in regards of how much he can throw, volume of throws in a game.
Sure.
How far he can throw, the strength of his arm.
Yeah.
He was doing a progressive throwing program in March and had no setbacks leading up to the OTAs in the spring, but
that's a good sign. And I will say this: I love this surgery. I like it a little less. I love it a little less when there's a bone fragment involved, because I know that it doesn't the outcomes aren't quite as good. But I love this surgery, labor. One of my favorite surgeries to do. Actually, the AC joint is also one of my favorite surgeries. It's great. Yeah. It's just really cool. It's very fun. But people do typically do pretty well, but it's a balancing act. You don't want to over tighten the shoulder, because if you do, then you can't get to where you need to get to in order to be able to throw with zip. But you can't leave it too loose, which is the worry, because then you run the risk of dislocating again.
Yeah, you don't want that.
Once you add that bone fragment in, now you have to get that to heal. Unless it's really small, then it almost doesn't matter. But generally, you got to get that to heal, and it doesn't always heal.
Right.
So it is a little bit of a balancing act, this one.
And I think,
but a good sign if he was throwing the ball well.
Yeah, and I think I think with most of these guys, they all have good reports leading up to camp. And obviously, this is what you want to hear, all the optimism right now, how everything's looking. You don't want to hear of any setbacks, anything crazy happening, which none of these guys that we've talked about really have had that reporting. Sure. Minus, I think, Tank Dell. I think but now it's completely separate, wrong time, wrong place, shooting incident, not associated with his fibula, so...
Is he supposed to be? I don't know if we have this information. Is he supposed to be ready for the start of the season?
I believe so. Yeah, I think he should be back. I don't think there's.
On the field running routes in May.
Yeah, so I mean he's been running around since May, and it's now late July. I would imagine he comes back.
Would make sense.
Full camp, no issues, and then hopefully everything else happens. You just don't hope that the nature of the beast, if you will, football hurts, football's dangerous, and football causes lots of injuries. So you hope none of these guys get back on the injury report.
Right. It is exciting. I'm also super excited about the Olympics being less than a week away.
Yeah, and I think hopefully next week we can kind of dive into the Olympics a little bit and talk about some of that stuff. Again, we just haven't had the right opportunity. We've been trying to line up some guests in the background, getting everything, all the pieces in line. Yeah. Just didn't happen yet.
Doesn't always come together
when we want to. Exactly. So I think we kind of touched on everything, and I think it was an exciting, unexpected talk about football that we both didn't really. I mean, I printed this out an hour before I got here, just in case we wanted to talk about it. And here we are talking. We did a whole episode on it.
It's our first fantasy football primer and NFL primer of the season.
Yeah, and then once NFL season comes and camp is underway, I'm sure we're going to get some information. We'll be back. So we'll see what happens. So before we go ahead and close out our tab here, we want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Virtual Orthopedics and Spine. From runner's knee and dog walker's hip, they got a doc for that. Yard work back and laptop wrist, they also have a doc for that. Virtual Orthopedics and Spine has 120 providers, over 20 PT and rehab facilities, and more than 25 surgical centers all across South Jersey. So find the right specialist for you at virtua.org/ortho. Next, we have Neck of the Woods Brewing Company serving us up the best beers in South Jersey. As we mentioned, it can arguably be award-winning no matter who you put it up against. Frank's a magician back there. And lastly, Timber Production, helping us put all of our audio, video, and everything on the social media, internet for all our awesome listeners. So thank you guys. Have a good one.
Kyle Miller, right?
Kyle Miller's our guy. And then we'll see you guys next time. Have a great one, and football is back.